The storm hit when Clara Whitfield was 3 miles from anywhere that mattered, her stolen horse wheezing beneath her and her fingers so numb she could barely feel the reins anymore. She had fled Dodge City with nothing but the clothes on her back, a horse that didn't belong to her, and the certain knowledge that if Marcus Dalton caught her, he would drag her back to that gilded prison he called a home and make sure she never saw daylight again. The November wind cut through her thin traveling dress like knives, and the snow that had started as gentle flakes an hour ago now fell in thick, blinding sheets that turned the Wyoming wilderness into a white void. Her teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue, tasting copper and fear in equal measure. The horse stumbled, nearly throwing her, and Clara knew with horrible certainty that they wouldn't make it much farther. She had no idea where she was going, only that she had to keep moving, had to put distance between herself and the man who had bought her from her father like she was cattle. The marriage contract was signed, but the wedding hadn't happened yet, and Clara would rather freeze to death in a blizzard than become Mrs. Marcus Dalton. The world tilted sideways, and Clara realized dimly that she was falling. The ground rushed up to meet her, snow cushioning the impact but doing nothing for the cold that had seeped into her bones. The horse, freed of its burden, kept walking, disappearing into the white curtain ahead. Clara tried to call out, but her voice was a weak rasp that the wind snatched away. She lay there in the snow, watching it pile up on her skirts, and thought about how stupid she had been, running away in November with no supplies, no plan, no destination, just blind panic and the desperate need to be free. At least she would die free, she told herself. At least Marcus would never own her. Get up. The voice was deep, rough as gravel, and seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Clara tried to lift her head but couldn't manage it. Strong hands gripped her arms, hauling her upright, and she found herself staring into a face that belonged in legends. The man was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that blocked out the storm behind him. Dark hair fell past his collar, plastered to his head by snow and ice, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as winter sky and sharp with intelligence, and something that might have been concern. "Can you walk?" he demanded. Clara's mouth moved, but no sound came out. The man cursed, a low rumble in his chest, and then she was being lifted as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. He cradled her against a chest that felt like solid oak beneath heavy furs, and Clara's frozen brain registered warmth, blessed warmth radiating from him. "Cabin's not far," he said, more to himself than to her. "Hold on." Clara didn't have much choice. Her fingers clutched weakly at his coat as he strode through the storm with the confidence of a man who knew every inch of this land. She should have been afraid, she realized distantly. Here she was, running from one man who wanted to own her, now in the arms of a complete stranger who could do anything he wished. But fear required energy she didn't have, and something about the way he held her, carefully, as if she were something precious rather than a burden, made her think that maybe, possibly, she had stumbled into luck rather than more danger. The cabin materialized out of the storm like a mirage, solid log walls and a roof covered in snow. The man kicked the door open and carried her inside, and the blast of heat from the fireplace made Clara gasp. He set her down in a chair near the fire, and she immediately started shaking, violent tremors that rattled her teeth. "That's good," the man said, moving with surprising speed for someone so large. "Means you are not too far gone." He draped a heavy blanket around her shoulders, then another, and then he was kneeling in front of the fire, building it up until flames roared. "Gotta get you out of those wet clothes." Clara's eyes flew open wide, alarm cutting through the fog in her brain. The man caught the look and held up both hands, palms out. "Easy," he said. "I am not going to hurt you, but you are soaked through and that dress is freezing to your skin. You keep it on, you will lose fingers and toes at minimum, maybe more." His gray eyes locked on hers, steady and honest. "I will turn around. There's a trunk by the bed with spare clothes. Get yourself into something dry, wrap up in all the blankets you can find, and then we will worry about getting you warm." He stood and turned his back, arms crossed over that broad chest, and Clara realized she didn't have much choice. He was right. She could already feel the wet fabric stiffening against her legs, and her fingers were white and waxy looking. With shaking hands that barely cooperated, she struggled out of the chair and stumbled to the trunk he had indicated. Inside, she found flannel shirts, wool socks, and long underwear that would swallow her whole. Everything smelled like pine and wood smoke and something else, something masculine and clean. Clara's frozen fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, and she nearly cried with frustration when they wouldn't cooperate. Behind her, the man stood still as a statue, apparently content to wait however long it took. "I cannot get the buttons," Clara finally admitted, hating how small her voice sounded. "Can I help?" he asked, still not turning around. "Yes," Clara whispered, because she didn't have another option. He moved to stand behind her, and Clara felt his fingers, surprisingly gentle for their size, working at the tiny buttons that ran down her spine. He was quick and efficient, no fumbling, and when he had the dress open, he stepped back immediately. "That should do it. Call out when you are decent." Clara peeled the wet dress off, nearly sobbing with relief when it was finally gone. Her corset was next, the whalebone frozen solid, and then her petticoats. She pulled on the long underwear, which hung off her frame ridiculously, then added one of the flannel shirts that fell to her knees. Wool socks went on her feet, 3 pairs because she couldn't feel her toes at all. She wrapped herself in a blanket and collapsed back into the chair. "Done," she managed. The man turned around, surveyed her for a long moment, and nodded. "Better. But you are still too cold. You need more heat." He dragged another chair next to hers and sat down, then reached out and took her hands in his. His palms were warm, almost hot, and Clara gasped at the sensation. He began rubbing her hands carefully, working circulation back into her fingers, and Clara bit her lip against the pins and needles sensation that followed. "What's your name?" he asked as he worked. "Clara Whitfield." "I am Nathaniel Cross. Friends call me Nate." He moved from her hands to her feet, pulling them into his lap and wrapping his large hands around them through the socks. "What were you doing out in a blizzard, Clara Whitfield?" Clara hesitated, but something about his steady presence made her want to tell the truth. "Running away." "From what?" "From a man who bought me." Nate's hands stilled for just a moment, then resumed their warming work. "Bought you. My father had debts. Marcus Dalton paid them off in exchange for my hand in marriage. I was supposed to marry him next week." The words tumbled out faster now. "But I couldn't do it. I could not spend the rest of my life belonging to a man I despise, living in his house like a pretty ornament, bearing his children. So I stole a horse and ran." "Where were you running to?" "I do not know. Anywhere. Nowhere. Just away." Clara felt tears prickling at her eyes. It was stupid. I know that now. But I was so desperate. "Not stupid," Nate said quietly. "Brave. Stupid would have been marrying him." He looked up at her, and there was something fierce in his expression. "No woman should be sold like property. Tell that to my father. If I ever meet him, I will." Nate's jaw clenched beneath his beard. "Your feet are warming up. That's good, but you are still too cold. You are still shivering." He was right. Despite the fire, despite the dry clothes and blankets, despite his warm hands, Clara couldn't stop shaking. Her core temperature was too low. The cold had sunk too deep into her bones. She knew enough to know that was dangerous, that people died of exposure even after being brought inside if they couldn't get warm enough fast enough. "What do I do?" she asked, hearing the fear in her own voice. Nate stood up, his expression serious. "There's one way to warm someone up fast when they are as cold as you are. Body heat. Direct contact, skin to skin under blankets. It is the most efficient way to raise your core temperature." He held her gaze. "You belong in my bed. That is where you will get warm fastest. But I give you my word, Clara Whitfield, I will not touch you beyond what is needed to keep you alive. I am only offering to warm you up." Clara stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. He was a stranger, a mountain man living alone in the wilderness, and he was suggesting they share a bed. Every proper instinct she had been raised with screamed that this was wrong, scandalous, dangerous. But the cold was dangerous too, and Nate's eyes held nothing but honest concern. "I trust you," she heard herself say, and was surprised to realize it was true. Nate nodded once, sharp and decisive. He scooped her up again, blankets and all, and carried her to the large bed in the corner of the cabin. It was piled high with furs and quilts, and when he laid her down on it, Clara sank into unexpected softness. Nate pulled the blankets up to her chin, then moved away. Clara closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of him moving around the cabin. She heard the fire being stoked again, heard water being poured, heard the clink of a pot on metal. Then the cabin went quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the howl of wind outside. The bed dipped beside her, and Clara's eyes flew open. Nate had removed his heavy outer clothes and was down to pants and a thin undershirt that did nothing to hide the massive muscles of his arms and chest. Even in the dim firelight, Clara could see the definition in his shoulders, the way his muscles moved beneath his skin as he settled onto the bed. He had clearly lived a hard life out here, one that required strength and endurance, and it showed in every line of his body. "I'm going to put my arms around you now," he warned. "Try to relax." He stretched out beside her on top of the blankets that cocooned her and drew her against him. Clara stiffened instinctively, but then the heat of him penetrated through the layers, a living furnace, and she couldn't help the small sound of relief that escaped her. Nate arranged them carefully, his chest against her back, one arm under her head and the other draped over her waist, and pulled more furs over both of them. "There," he murmured near her ear. "Give it time. You will warm up." Clara lay rigid in his arms, acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, of the strength in the arm that held her, of the steady rise and fall of his chest against her back. This was far more intimate than anything she had ever experienced, and with a man she had met less than an hour ago. It should have terrified her. Instead, wrapped in his warmth and strength, Clara felt something she had not felt in months. Safe. "Why do you live out here alone?" she asked into the quiet, needing to break the strange tension. "I like the solitude," Nate replied. "I was a scout for the army for a while, years back. Spent a lot of time in the wilderness and found I preferred it to civilization. When my service was done, I came out here, built this cabin, and stayed." "Do you not get lonely?" "Sometimes. But I prefer lonely to being around people who want to use you or control you." He paused. "I imagine you understand that now." "Yes," Clara whispered. "I do." "How old are you, Clara?" 22. And you?" 27. His breath stirred her hair. "You are very young to be so desperate." "Age has nothing to do with desperation," Clara said. "Only circumstances." "True enough." His arm tightened around her slightly, a gesture that felt protective rather than possessive. "Are you warming up?" Clara took stock of herself. The violent shivering had eased to occasional tremors, and she could feel her toes and fingers again, though they ached fiercely. The core deep cold was still there, but beginning to recede in the face of Nate's heat. "Yes, some. It hurts." "That is good. Means the blood is flowing again." Nate shifted slightly, adjusting their positions so more of his body pressed against hers. "Try to sleep if you can. Your body needs rest to recover." "Will you be here when I wake up?" "I will be right here," he promised. "Sleep, Clara." Surrounded by warmth and furs, held secure in the arms of a stranger who had saved her life, Clara let her eyes drift shut. The last thing she was aware of was the steady beat of Nate's heart against her back and the surprising realization that she felt more at home in this rough cabin with this mountain man than she ever had in her father's house or facing a future with Marcus Dalton. When Clara woke, gray winter light was filtering through the cabin's small windows, and she was alone in the bed. For a moment she panicked, disoriented, not remembering where she was. Then memory crashed back and she sat up, looking around wildly. Nate was at the table, working on something she couldn't see. He looked up when he heard her move and stood immediately. "How do you feel?" Clara considered the question. Her head ached and her body felt battered, but the deep cold was gone, replaced by blessed warmth. "Better, much better." She looked down at herself, still wrapped in his too large clothes. "Thank you. You saved my life." "You are welcome." Nate came over to the bed, and in the daylight, Clara got her first clear look at him. He was even more impressive than she had realized last night, tall and broad, with thick dark hair that fell in waves past his collar and a full beard that did not quite hide the strong line of his jaw. His gray eyes were striking against his tanned skin, and there was a scar cutting through his left eyebrow that gave him a dangerous look. But it was his build that caught her attention, the way his shirt stretched across shoulders packed with muscle, the strength evident in his forearms and hands. This was a man who could tear down trees with his bare hands if needed, who could carry a full-grown woman through a blizzard without breaking stride. He was utterly, intimidatingly masculine, and Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with fever. "Are you hungry?" Nate asked, apparently oblivious to her staring. "Starving," Clara admitted. He nodded and moved back to the table, returning with a bowl of something that smelled wonderful. "Venison stew. Made it last night while you slept." Clara took the bowl gratefully and spooned up a bite. The stew was rich and hearty, full of tender meat and root vegetables, and she nearly moaned at the taste. She had not eaten since yesterday morning before her escape, and her body craved fuel. Nate watched her eat with what might have been approval, then fetched his own bowl and sat in the chair across from the bed. "The storm is still going," he said. "You will need to stay here until it passes." Clara's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "How long will that be?" "Could be a day, could be 3. Hard to say with November storms." Nate met her eyes. "Is that a problem?" "No," Clara said quickly. Too quickly, perhaps, because Nate's expression shifted to something she could not read. "I mean, I have nowhere else to go, and even if I did, I could not go out in that." She gestured toward the window, where snow was still falling thick and fast. "What will you do when the storm ends?" Nate asked quietly. It was the question Clara had been avoiding thinking about. "I do not know. I suppose I will need to get to the nearest town, try to find work somewhere. Maybe go east, where Marcus will not find me." "He will look for you." "I know." Clara set down her bowl, her appetite suddenly gone. "He paid a lot of money for me. He will want his investment back." "You are not an investment. You're a person." Nate's voice was hard. "And no one is taking you anywhere you do not want to go." "You cannot fight my battles for me, Nate. You do not even know me." "I know you were brave enough to run. I know you would rather risk death than give up your freedom. That's enough." He stood and took her empty bowl. "Rest more. You are still recovering." Clara wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her again. Her body had been through an ordeal, and it needed time to heal. She let Nate tuck the blankets back around her and settled into the softness of his bed, watching as he moved around the cabin with easy efficiency. Over the next 2 days, as the storm raged outside, Clara learned about the man who had saved her life. Nate was not much of a talker, but he answered her questions when she asked them, and slowly a picture emerged. He had grown up in Pennsylvania, the youngest of 4 brothers. When he was 18, he had joined the army to escape a future working in his father's mill and had been sent west. He had discovered a talent for tracking and wilderness survival and had spent 5 years as a scout before mustering out and disappearing into the mountains. "Do you ever see your family?" Clara asked on the second day, as she sat wrapped in blankets by the fire while Nate worked on repairing a snowshoe. "No," Nate said simply. "We were not close. They thought I was crazy for leaving steady work to live in the wilderness." "Are you? Crazy, I mean." He looked up at her, a glint of humor in his gray eyes. "Probably. But I am happy crazy, which is better than miserable and sane." Clara laughed, the sound surprising her. She had not laughed in months, not since her father had told her about the arrangement with Marcus. "I think I understand that." "Tell me about your life," Nate said, returning his attention to the snowshoe. "Before all this." So Clara did. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, the daughter of a merchant who had once been successful, but had slowly gambled away his fortune. She told him about her mother, who had died when Clara was 15, and how her father had become harder and more distant after that. She told him about the parade of creditors, the dwindling household, the day Marcus Dalton had come to their door with an offer that her father could not refuse. "He is not a bad man exactly," Clara said slowly, trying to be fair. "But he is cold, calculating. He wants a wife who will look good on his arm and give him children and never have a thought in her head that he did not put there. When he looked at me, I felt like something he was purchasing from a catalog, not a person, just another possession." "So you ran." "So I ran." Clara pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "And I do not regret it, even though I nearly died. At least I made my own choice." Nate was quiet for a long moment, his hands still on the snowshoe. "You can stay here," he finally said, "when the storm ends, if you want. I have supplies enough for 2, and I can hunt for more. You would be safe here." Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." He looked up and his gray eyes were intense. "I'm not asking for anything. Clara, Not your hand or your body or anything else. Just offering you a place to be until you figure out what comes next. No strings. Why? Clara whispered. Why would you do that for me? Nate set down the snowshoe and stood, crossing to crouch in front of her chair. This close, she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could see the sincerity written in every line of his face. Because someone should have done it before now, because you deserve a chance to choose your own path. And because... He paused, something uncertain crossing his expression. Because I like having you here. The cabin feels different with you in it. Better. Clara's breath caught. She had known Nate for less than 3 days, but in that time, he had shown her more respect and kindness than any man in her life ever had. He had saved her, warmed her, fed her, asked nothing in return, and when she looked at him, she felt something she had never felt before, a pull that was both exciting and terrifying. I would like to stay, she said softly, for a while at least. Nate's face broke into a smile, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his features from intimidating to breathtaking. Good. The storm finally broke on the morning of the 3rd day, leaving behind a world buried in white. Nate ventured out first, breaking trail, and returned an hour later to report that the snow was deep but manageable. I need to check my trap, he said, and hunt if I can find game. Will you be all right here alone? I think I can manage not to freeze to death in a warm cabin with a roaring fire, Clara said dryly. Nate grinned at her tone. Fair enough. There's more stew on the fire if you get hungry. I should be back before dark. He bundled up in his heavy furs and headed out, and Clara was left alone in the cabin for the first time. She stood in the middle of the single room, looking around at what would be her home, at least for now. It was rough but well made, with tight walls and a solid roof. The furniture was simple, clearly handmade, but functional. Everything was neat and organized, showing a disciplined mind despite the isolated location. Clara spent the day exploring her new space, taking stock of supplies and learning where everything was kept. Nate had not been exaggerating about being well provisioned. There were barrels of flour and salt and sugar, jars of preserved vegetables, strings of dried meat hanging from the rafters. He had a good supply of firewood stacked against one wall, and tools hung in orderly rows. A rifle and a shotgun rested above the door, both well maintained. By the time Nate returned, Clara had cleaned the cabin, swept the floors, and started a new pot of stew. He stamped snow from his boots and stared at her in surprise. You did not have to do all this, he said. I wanted to earn my keep, Clara replied. If I'm going to stay here, I should contribute. Nate looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he just nodded. Thank you then. It looks good. They fell into an easy routine over the following days. Nate would go out to hunt or check traps, while Clara managed the cabin, cooking and cleaning and mending. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk, sharing stories and learning about each other in the way people do when they have nothing but time. Clara found herself watching Nate more and more, admiring the way he moved with such confidence and strength, the way his muscles flexed when he split wood or hauled water. He was utterly unpretentious, comfortable in his own skin in a way Clara had never experienced. And he was kind, in small ways that probably did not even register to him, but that meant everything to her. The way he always made sure she had the best chair by the fire, the way he brought her fresh snow to melt for washing, the way he listened when she spoke, truly listened, as if her words mattered. She was falling for him. Clara realized it one evening about 2 weeks after the storm, as she watched Nate work on carving something from a piece of wood. The firelight played over his features, softening the hard edges, and her heart did that complicated thing again, squeezing and expanding all at once. She was falling for this mountain man who had taken her in without question, who asked nothing of her, who made her feel safe and valued for the first time in her life. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like coming home. Winter deepened around them, and the cabin became a world unto itself. Clara had never been so isolated, so cut off from civilization, and she found that she loved it. Here, there was no one to judge her, no expectations to meet, no role to play. She could just be Clara, whoever that turned out to be. One evening in early December, as they sat by the fire after supper, Nate said quietly, "You have not mentioned Dalton in days." Clara looked up from the shirt she was mending, one of Nate's that had torn. "No, I suppose I have not." Are you still worried he will find you?" "I do not think he can find me here," Clara said slowly. "And even if he could, I do not think I am as afraid of him as I was. Being here, learning to live a different way, it has made me stronger." "You were always strong," Nate said. "You just did not know it." Their eyes met across the fire, and something crackled in the air between them, something that had nothing to do with burning wood. Clara saw the way Nate's gaze dropped to her mouth, saw the tension in his shoulders, and knew that he felt it too, this pull between them. "Nate," she whispered. He stood abruptly, the spell breaking. "I should get more wood for the night." He grabbed his coat and headed outside, leaving Clara staring after him with her heart pounding. When he came back in, arms loaded with split logs, he would not meet her eyes. He stacked the wood, banked the fire, and announced he was going to bed. Clara watched him disappear into the small alcove where he had been sleeping since giving her the main bed, and felt something very much like frustration curl in her stomach. She lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the way Nate had looked at her. He wanted her, she was almost sure of it, but he was holding back, keeping his distance, probably because he had promised not to touch her beyond what was necessary. He was a man of his word, even when it clearly cost him. Clara rolled over, punching the pillow into a better shape, and made a decision. Nate had given her a choice about coming here, about staying, about everything. It was time she made a choice about this too. The next morning, Clara waited until Nate had finished breakfast and was preparing to head out for the day. "Nate, can we talk?" He looked up warily. "About what?" "About us." Nate went very still. "There is no us, Clara. You are a guest here. I made you a promise." "You promised not to touch me beyond what was necessary to keep me alive," Clara said steadily. "And you have kept that promise, but what if I want you to touch me?" The wood Nate had been holding clattered to the floor. "Clara, you cannot say things like that." "Why not?" "It is the truth." Clara stood and crossed to him, heart hammering but determined. "I have been here for a month now, Nate, a month of watching you, talking to you, learning who you are, and I have come to care for you. More than care. I think I am falling in love with you." Nate's eyes went wide, something like panic flashing through them. "You cannot love me. You barely know me." "I know you better than I have ever known anyone," Clara countered. "I know you are kind and strong and honest. I know you make me feel safe and valued. I know that when I look at you, my heart does things it has never done before. That is love, Nate, or the beginning of it." "You are just grateful," Nate said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I saved your life. You are confusing gratitude with love." "I am grateful," Clara agreed, "but that is not why I love you. I love you because of who you are, because you saw me as a person when everyone else saw me as property, because you gave me a choice when no one else would." She took a deep breath. "And because I see the way you look at me sometimes when you think I am not paying attention. You feel this too." Nate closed his eyes. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "God help me, yes, I feel it. But Clara, I'm not the right man for you. You deserve someone educated, someone cultured, someone who can give you a real life, not this rough existence." "I do not want cultured or educated," Clara said fiercely. "I want real. I want honest. I want you. You are 22 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. You should not throw it away on a mountain man who lives in the middle of nowhere." "I am not throwing anything away. I am choosing." Clara reached out and laid her hand on his chest, feeling his heart thundering beneath her palm. "You told me once that I deserved to choose my own path. Well, I am choosing, Nate. I am choosing you, if you want me." Nate's control finally snapped. His hand came up to cover hers, pressing it against his chest. "If I want you." "Clara, I have wanted you since the moment you opened your eyes in my arms. Every day you have been here has been sweet torture, having you so close and not being able to touch you, to hold you the way I want to." "Then do it," Clara breathed. "Hold me, touch me. I am giving you permission, Nate. I am giving you myself." With a sound that was half groan, half surrender, Nate bent and captured her mouth with his. The kiss was everything Clara had imagined, and more, hungry and gentle and deep. His arms came around her, pulling her tight against him, and Clara melted into his strength. He kissed like a man dying of thirst. And she was water, like he could never get enough, and Clara gave as good as she got, pouring all her pent-up longing into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nate rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said roughly. "I have been trying not to, trying to be honorable, but I cannot help it. I love you, Clara Whitfield." Joy burst through Clara's chest like sunrise. "I love you too." Nate kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. "Marry me," he murmured against her lips. "Let me do this right. Let me make you mine in the eyes of God and man." "Yes," Clara said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They stood wrapped in each other's arms for a long time, the fire crackling beside them and the winter wind howling outside, and Clara thought that she had never been happier. She had run away from a forced marriage and found true love instead, in the arms of a mountain man in the wilderness. Getting married, however, proved more complicated than simply declaring their love. The nearest town with a preacher was over 30 miles away, and the winter snow made travel difficult. Nate insisted they wait until the weather cleared, not wanting to risk Clara's safety on a long journey. "Besides," he said, pulling her close, "I do not need a piece of paper to know you are mine. In my heart, we are already married." "In mine, too," Clara agreed, "but I want it official. I want there to be no question." "When the spring thaw comes," Nate promised, "we will go to town, find a preacher, and do it proper." In the meantime, they lived as husband and wife in all but name. Clara moved back into the big bed, this time with Nate beside her, and discovered the full depths of love and intimacy. Nate was a careful lover, mindful of her innocence, taking his time to learn what pleased her. Their nights were full of whispered words and gentle touches, of pleasure given and received, of two souls learning to move together as one. The days were full, too, as they worked side by side to maintain their life. Nate taught Clara how to shoot, how to track game in the snow, how to read the weather and the land. Clara taught Nate things, too, though neither of them articulated it. She taught him softness, taught him that his rough edges could be loved, taught him to laugh more and worry less. Together, they were better than they had been apart. In late January, when they had been living as a couple for about 6 weeks, Nate came back from checking his traps with an odd expression on his face. Clara looked up from the bread she was kneading and felt her stomach drop. "What is it? What is wrong?" "There is a man in town asking questions about a runaway woman," Nate said quietly. "I heard about it from a trapper I ran into. A man from Kansas, well-dressed, throwing money around. He is offering a reward for information about a young woman who stole a horse in November." Clara's hands stilled in the dough. "Marcus. Seems likely." Nate came to her, cupping her face in his hands. "He has not found you yet, and he will not. I will make sure of it." "What if he comes here?" "Then I will deal with him." There was steel in Nate's voice, a hardness Clara had not heard before. "You are mine now, Clara, and I protect what is mine." Despite his assurances, Clara could not shake the fear that had settled in her chest. For weeks she had felt safe, had let herself believe that her old life could not touch her here. Now, Marcus was close, asking questions, and it was only a matter of time before someone pointed him in the right direction. Her fears proved justified 3 days later when a knock sounded on the cabin door. Clara and Nate both froze, staring at each other. No one came to the cabin uninvited. No one knew it was here except a handful of trappers and mountain men who respected Nate's privacy. "Stay behind me," Nate said quietly, reaching for the rifle above the door. He pulled the door open, and Clara's blood turned to ice. Standing on the threshold, looking incongruous in his fine wool coat and polished boots, was Marcus Dalton. His eyes swept past Nate and locked on Clara, and his expression went from triumph to cold fury in an instant. "There you are," he said. "I've been looking everywhere for you, my dear." "She's not your dear," Nate said flatly, "and you are not welcome here. Leave." Marcus's gaze finally focused on Nate, taking in his size and the rifle in his hands. Something that might have been concern flickered across his face, but he masked it quickly with arrogance. "I do not know who you are, but the woman behind you is my fiancée. She stole from me and ran away. I have come to collect what is mine. Clara is not yours. She is mine." Nate's voice was hard as granite. "She's not going anywhere with you." Is that so? Marcus pulled a folded paper from his coat. I have a marriage contract signed by her father, binding her to me. Legally, she belongs to me. I do not care what your paper says. Clara belongs to no one but herself, and she has chosen to stay here with me. Marcus's lip curled. Do not be ridiculous. Clara is a lady raised in society. She does not belong in this hovel with a savage like you. Now, step aside so I can collect my property and be on my way. Call her property again, Nate said softly, dangerously, and I will put you in the snow permanently. The two men stared at each other, the air thick with tension. Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. This was the confrontation she had been dreading, the moment when her old life collided with her new one. Marcus, she said, stepping out from behind Nate, listen to me. I am not going back with you. I am sorry for stealing your horse, and I will repay you for that somehow, but I will not marry you. I do not love you, and I never will. Love, Marcus scoffed. What does love have to do with anything? We had an arrangement. Your father's debts are paid because of me. You owe me. My father owed you, not me, and whatever debt existed, I have paid it by escaping. You do not own me, Marcus. You never did. We had a contract, Marcus repeated, his voice rising. Legally binding? I did not sign anything, Clara shot back. My father did. Sue him if you want, but leave me alone. I will not leave without you. Marcus took a step forward, and Nate immediately shifted, the rifle coming up. That is close enough, Nate warned. You need to leave. Now. I am not leaving without what is mine. Then you are not leaving. Nate's finger moved to the trigger. Your choice. For a long moment, Clara thought Marcus might actually be stupid enough to test Nate's resolve. But then he saw something in Nate's face, something that made him take a step back. The mountain man would absolutely shoot him, and they both knew it. This is not over, Marcus hissed. I will have the law on you. I will have you arrested for kidnapping and theft. Go ahead and try, Nate said evenly. But you will need to find a lawman willing to travel out here in winter, and good luck with that. And when spring comes and they can travel, I will be happy to tell them how I rescued Clara from dying in a blizzard, and she chose to stay of her own free will. Now get off my land. Marcus stared at them both, his face mottled with rage. You will regret this, he spat at Clara. Both of you will regret this. He spun on his heel and stalked away, disappearing into the trees. Nate stood in the doorway until he was sure Marcus was truly gone, then closed and barred the door. He set the rifle aside and turned to Clara, pulling her into his arms. Are you all right? Clara was shaking, but not from cold. He found me. I did not think he would, but he did. And now he knows you are protected. Nate stroked her hair. He will not come back, Clara. He is a coward underneath all that bluster. He saw that I would kill for you, and that scared him. You would kill for me? Clara pulled back to look up at him. Without hesitation, Nate said simply. You are mine to protect. I take that seriously. Fresh tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, but they were tears of relief and love rather than fear. What did I do to deserve you? You were brave enough to choose freedom over safety, Nate said, kissing her forehead. That is what you did. And I thank God every day that you ran toward my mountain. So do I, Clara whispered. So do I. Marcus did not return, though Clara jumped at every sound for the next few weeks, expecting him to come back with the law or hired guns. But as Nate had predicted, the mountain man's reputation and the harsh winter were enough to keep him away. Slowly, Clara relaxed again, letting herself believe that maybe finally she was truly free. The winter passed in a cocoon of love and work and simple happiness. Clara had never imagined that life could be so uncomplicated, so real. Every day with Nate was a gift, a chance to be herself without apology or pretense, and every night in his arms was a revelation, a discovery of passion and tenderness she had not known existed. When the first green shoots began to push through the melting snow in March, Nate announced it was time to make the trip to town. I want you wed properly before spring gets here in earnest, he said. I want everyone to know you are my wife. They set out on a clear morning, traveling on horseback through the mountains toward the nearest settlement. The journey took 2 days, and they camped under the stars the first night, wrapped in each other in blankets. Clara had never felt so alive, so connected to the world around her. The town, when they reached it, was small and rough, the kind of place where questions were not asked and the past did not matter much. They found the preacher, a weather-beaten man named Josiah, who had been ministering to miners and trappers for 30 years. He took one look at Nate and Clara, saw the love plainly written on their faces, and agreed to marry them that very afternoon. Clara wore the best dress she could borrow from the preacher's wife, a simple blue calico that fit reasonably well. Nate stood beside her in his cleanest clothes, his long hair tied back and his beard neatly trimmed. They spoke their vows in the small church with only the preacher and his wife as witnesses, promising to love and cherish each other until death parted them. When Nate kissed her as his wife, Clara felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was right. This was where she belonged, not in her father's house, not in Marcus Dalton's gilded cage, but here, with this strong, gentle man who had given her back herself. They spent their wedding night in the town's single boarding house, a luxury after months in the cabin. Nate made love to his wife with a tenderness and passion that left Clara breathless and weeping with joy. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Nate traced patterns on her shoulder and said quietly, "I never thought I would have this, a wife, a partner. I thought I was meant to be alone." "You are not alone anymore," Clara said, pressing a kiss to his chest. "You have me. Always." "Always," Nate agreed. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret it," Clara promised. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." They returned to the cabin as husband and wife and threw themselves into preparing for spring. There was garden to plant, seeds Nate had bought in town, and Clara threw herself into the work with enthusiasm. She had never grown her own food before, but she learned quickly, her hands becoming calloused and strong from working the soil. As spring turned to summer, Clara began to suspect she was with child. She said nothing at first, wanting to be sure, but when 3 months passed with no monthly courses, she knew it was true. She chose to tell Nate one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and red. "Nate, I have something to tell you." He turned to her, immediately alert. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Everything is right." Clara took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Nate went absolutely still, his gray eyes wide. "A baby? You're sure?" "I'm sure." A grin split his face, transforming him into someone years younger. He let out a whoop that probably scared every animal within a mile and swept Clara up into his arms, spinning her around. "A baby! Clara, we're going to have a baby!" "Careful," Clara laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "Put me down before you make me dizzy." Nate set her down gently, immediately solicitous. "Are you all right? Do you feel sick? Do you need to sit? Should you be working in the garden?" "I'm fine," Clara assured him, touched by his concern. "Women have babies all the time, Nate. I'm not fragile." "But you are precious," Nate said, cupping her face. "You and this child are the most precious things in my life. I will not take any chances." As summer deepened, Clara's belly began to swell, and Nate became increasingly protective. He insisted on doing all the heavy work, would not let her chop wood or haul water, and fussed over her like a mother hen. Clara found it both endearing and exasperating, but she could not really complain. His love was written in every gesture, every worried glance, every time he rested his hand on her growing stomach, and marveled at the life they had created. In September, when the leaves were turning gold and red, Nate made another trip to town to fetch a midwife. He convinced a capable woman named Edna to come stay with them for a few weeks, offering payment in furs and gold dust, and returned with her in tow. Edna took one look at Clara and pronounced her healthy and strong, predicting an easy birth. "This one has good hips," she said approvingly, "and she's been working hard, keeping strong. Baby should come quick when the time comes." The time came in late October, almost exactly a year after Clara had fled into the blizzard. The pains started just after dawn, and by mid-afternoon, Clara was bearing down with all her strength, while Nate held her hands and murmured encouragement. Edna was right. The birth was relatively quick and uncomplicated, and as the sun set behind the mountains, Clara's son entered the world with a lusty cry. Nate took the baby with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face into his beard. "A son," he said hoarsely. "Clara, we have a son." "Let me see him," Clara said. exhausted but desperate to hold her child. Nate brought the baby to her, and Clara looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt her heart expand to hold even more love than she thought possible. The baby had dark hair like his father, and was red-faced and angry at being thrust into the cold world, but he was beautiful. "What should we name him?" Nate asked, perched on the edge of the bed beside them. Clara thought of the journey that had brought her here, of the storm and the cold and the man who had saved her. "Jacob," she said. "Jacob Cross. It means one who supplants, one who takes the place of another. He is our new beginning." "Jacob," Nate repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Welcome to the world, Jacob Cross." Their son thrived in the mountain air, growing strong and healthy. Nate was a devoted father, spending hours holding the baby, talking to him, showing him the world outside the cabin windows. Clara watched them together and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what she had been running toward that night in the blizzard, even if she had not known it. Not just freedom from Marcus Dalton, but freedom to find this, to have this. A family built on love and choice and mutual respect. Jacob was 6 months old when riders came to the cabin. Clara was hanging laundry when she heard the horses, and her heart immediately kicked into high gear. Nate appeared from the trees where he had been cutting firewood, rifle in hand, and positioned himself between Clara and the approaching men. There were 3 of them, hard-looking men with guns on their hips. The one in front, a gray-haired man with a star pinned to his vest, held up a hand in greeting. "Nathaniel Cross?" "That is me," Nate said, not lowering the rifle. "What do you want?" "I am Marshal Harding from Dodge City. I'm looking for a woman named Clara Whitfield. I have information that she might be here." Clara stepped forward, her chin high despite her fear. "I am Clara Whitfield, or I was. I am Clara Cross now." The marshal's eyes flicked to her, taking in her simple dress and the baby in the sling against her chest. "Mrs. Cross, I need to ask you some questions about the theft of a horse last November." "The horse belonged to Marcus Dalton," Clara said steadily. "I borrowed it without permission when I fled his house. Is he pressing charges?" "He was," the marshal said, "but he has withdrawn them, said he wanted to let the matter drop." Relief flooded through Clara, so strong it made her knees weak. "Then why are you here?" "To verify that you are here of your own free will," the marshal said. "Mr. Dalton made some serious allegations about kidnapping and coercion. I need to hear from you directly that you are staying here because you want to." "I am here because I want to be," Clara said firmly. "My husband saved my life when I nearly froze to death in a blizzard. We fell in love and we married by choice. There was no kidnapping, no coercion. I'm exactly where I want to be." The marshal studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "That is what I thought. Mr. Dalton struck me as a man who did not like losing, and I figured there might be more to the story than he was telling." He touched his hat. "I will put it in my report that you are here voluntarily and that you are a married woman with a child. That should be the end of it." "Thank you, Marshal," Nate said. The lawman left, and Nate pulled Clara into his arms, careful of the baby between them. "It is over," he said into her hair. "Truly over. Dalton has given up." "He finally realized he could not win," Clara said, "that I was never going to be his no matter what he did." "You were never his," Nate agreed. "You were always meant to be mine." The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Clara and Nate had 2 more children, a daughter they named Sarah and another son they called Daniel. The cabin grew to accommodate their expanding family, with Nate adding rooms and a larger hearth. They worked side by side to build a life in the mountains, teaching their children to be strong and independent and kind. Jacob grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved following his father into the wilderness to hunt and trap. Sarah was bright and curious, always asking questions and exploring. Daniel was the wild one, fearless and full of energy, keeping Clara constantly on her toes. Together, they filled the cabin with laughter and noise and life. Nate proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, spending hours teaching his children the skills they would need to survive in the wilderness. But he also taught them gentleness, taught them to respect the land and the animals they hunted, taught them that strength and kindness were not opposites, but complements. Clara sometimes thought about her old life, about her father in Philadelphia and the world she had left behind. But she never regretted her choice. Here in the mountains with Nate and their children, She had found a richness that had nothing to do with money or society and everything to do with love and purpose and freedom. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nate took Clara on a walk to the spot where he had found her in the storm. The snow was falling gently, reminding them both of that night so long ago. "Do you remember?" Nate asked, pulling Clara close. "I remember thinking I was going to die," Clara said. "And then you appeared like some kind of mountain god and saved me." "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," Nate said. "Even half frozen and terrified, you were beautiful. And brave. So brave." "I was terrified," Clara admitted. "Of the cold, of Marcus, of everything. But then you said I belonged in your bed, that you would warm me up, and something in me just knew I was safe." "You did belong in my bed," Nate said, a smile in his voice. "You belonged in my life. I just did not know it yet." "And now?" Clara asked, looking up at him. "Now I cannot imagine my life without you," Nate said seriously. "You and our children, you are everything to me. Every day, I thank God that you ran into that storm and that I found you." "I thank God too," Clara said, "for the storm, for you, for all of it, because it brought me here, to the life I was always meant to have." Nate kissed her, slow and deep and sweet, and Clara melted into him just as she had that first night. Some things never changed, she thought. The way he made her feel safe and cherished, the way his touch set her on fire, the way her heart beat faster whenever he smiled at her. That was the foundation they had built their life on, and it was as strong now as it had been that night in the blizzard. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand where their children waited, warm and safe and loved. Smoke rose from the chimney, a beacon in the wilderness, and Clara thought about how this rough cabin had become home in a way her father's fine house never had. Home was not about walls or furniture or society. Home was where you were loved for who you were, where you could be yourself without fear or pretense. Home was here, with Nate. As the years continued to pass, the children grew and thrived. Jacob, at 18, was nearly as tall as his father and just as strong, with Nate's gray eyes and Clara's dark hair. He was already talking about building his own cabin further up the mountain, wanting to stake his own claim in the wilderness. Sarah, at 15, was beautiful and intelligent, with a quick wit and her mother's determination. She had announced her intention to become a teacher, to bring education to the children of trappers and mountain folk. Daniel, at 12, was still trying to figure out who he wanted to be, but he had his father's love of the land and his mother's kind heart. Nate's hair had gone gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But he was still the strong, capable man Clara had fallen in love with. If anything, age had made him more attractive to her, had added depth and wisdom to his rugged features. And he still looked at her with the same heat and love he had shown on their wedding night, still made her feel like the most precious thing in his world. Clara herself had changed too. The soft city girl who had fled into the blizzard was gone, replaced by a woman hardened and strengthened by years of frontier life. Her hands were calloused from work, her skin weathered from sun and wind, but she stood straighter now, more confident in herself and her place in the world. She had found her strength in the wilderness, had discovered that she was capable of more than she ever imagined. One summer evening, when Jacob was 19 and getting ready to leave for his own adventure, the family gathered around the fire after supper. Nate had his arm around Clara, and the children were scattered around them, comfortable and content. "Tell us the story," Sarah asked, as she had asked dozens of times before, "about how you and Mother met." Nate and Clara exchanged a smile. It was a familiar request, one their children never seemed to tire of hearing. "Your mother was running away," Nate began, as he always did, "from a man who wanted to own her toward a future she could not see. She stole a horse and rode into a blizzard with no plan and no destination, just the desperate need to be free. And I nearly died," Clara picked up the story. "The storm was terrible, and I was so cold I could not feel my fingers or toes. I fell off the horse and lay in the snow, thinking that was the end. But then your father found me," Clara continued, looking up at Nate with all the love in her heart shining in her eyes. "He picked me up and carried me to his cabin, and he built up the fire and got me warm. And when I was still too cold, still shivering so hard I thought I might shake apart, he said something I will never forget." "What did he say?" Daniel asked, even though he knew the answer. He said, "You belong in my bed, only meaning to warm you up," Clara quoted, her voice soft with memory. "And he held me all night, keeping me safe and warm and alive." "And I fell in love with her right then," Nate said, "with this brave, stubborn woman who would rather risk death than give up her freedom. I knew she was special. I just did not know yet that she would become my whole world." "We fell in love over that winter," Clara said. "Your father taught me how to survive in the wilderness, and I taught him that being alone was not the same as being free. We found each other in that storm, and we have been together ever since." "And then you got married and had us," Sarah said, satisfied. "And then we got married and had you," Clara agreed. "3 miracles that made our family complete." Jacob looked at his parents, seeing the love that still burned between them after all these years. "I want what you have," he said quietly. "Someone who looks at me the way mother looks at father, someone who is my partner in every way." "You will find it," Nate assured him. "When you are ready, when the time is right, love has a way of finding you when you least expect it. Just maybe do not run into a blizzard to find it," Clara added dryly, and everyone laughed. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Clara and Nate stood outside the cabin, looking up at the stars. The night was clear and warm, nothing like that terrible storm so long ago, but Clara still remembered every detail of that night, the fear, the cold, the certainty that she was going to die. And then Nate, solid and warm and safe, pulling her back from the edge. "Do you ever regret it?" Nate asked quietly. "Giving up society, civilization, all the things you were raised to expect?" "Never," Clara said firmly. "Not once. Everything I gave up was nothing compared to what I gained. You, our children, this life. It is more than I ever dreamed of having." "I am glad," Nate said, pulling her close, "because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Cross." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Clara replied. "My mountain man, my hero, my love." They stood together under the stars, the cabin warm and bright behind them, their children safe inside, and Clara felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was what happiness looked like, not ball gowns and fine houses and society dinners. This, love and family and a life built together from nothing but determination and devotion. She had run into a storm seeking freedom and had found so much more. Oh, she had found home. She had found love. She had found herself. And it had all started with a mountain man who pulled her out of the snow and told her she belonged in his bed, only meaning to warm her up. But he had warmed her in ways that went far beyond body heat. He had warmed her soul, her heart, her life. He had given her everything she had been searching for without even knowing what she was looking for. And she had given him the same in return, bringing light and love into a life of solitude, showing him that he did not have to be alone, that he could be loved exactly as he was. They had saved each other, she realized, not just that night in the blizzard, but every day since. They had chosen each other over and over again, through hard times and good, through sickness and health, through all the challenges that life in the wilderness threw at them. And they would keep choosing each other, Clara knew, for the rest of their lives, however long or short that might be. Because what they had was rare and precious and worth fighting for. The years rolled on, bringing changes and challenges, but never diminishing the love at the heart of the Cross family. Jacob did build his cabin up the mountain and eventually brought home a wife, a strong-willed woman named Emma, who fit into their family as if she had always been there. Sarah did become a teacher, establishing a small school in the nearest town and making a difference in the lives of dozens of children. Daniel found his calling as well, becoming a guide for people traveling through the mountains, using the skills his father had taught him to help others navigate the wilderness safely. Nate and Clara became grandparents, marveling at the tiny lives that their children brought into the world. They watched their grandchildren grow with the same love and devotion they had given to their own children, passing down stories and skills and values that would shape another generation. The cabin, which had started as a rough single room, grew into a homestead with outbuildings and a barn, a large garden that provided food year-round, and chickens that provided eggs and meat. It became a gathering place for the extended family, a hub of love and activity that stood in stark contrast to its origins as the isolated refuge of a solitary mountain man. But through all the changes, one thing remained constant. The love between Nate and Clara never wavered, never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper and richer with each passing year, seasoned by shared experiences and tested by challenges overcome together. They grew old together, Nate's hair going white and Clara's dark locks turning silver, their bodies showing the marks of a life lived hard but well. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the same people they had been that night in the storm. Nate still saw the brave runaway who had chosen freedom over security, who had run into a blizzard rather than accept a life she did not want. Clara still saw the strong mountain man who had saved her life and then given her something even more valuable, the freedom to choose her own future. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party, gathering the entire family and half the mountain community to celebrate. There was music and dancing and food, laughter and stories and toasts to the couple who had built a life and a legacy in the wilderness. As the sun set and the party wound down, Nate took Clara's hand and led her away from the crowd, back to the spot where it had all begun. The place where he had found her in the snow, where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. 30 years, Nate said, his voice rough with emotion. 30 years since I found you here, more dead than alive, and carried you home. Best decision you ever made, Clara teased gently. Best decision we both made, Nate corrected. You chose to trust me that night, chose to stay when you could have left, chose to love me when you could have run again. Every choice you made brought us here, to this life, this family, and I would not change a single moment of it. Neither would I, Clara said, leaning into his familiar strength, even the hard parts, even the scary parts, because they all led to this, to us. Nate turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Even after 30 years, his touch still sent warmth through her, still made her heart beat faster. Some things, Clara thought, never changed. I love you, Clara Cross, Nate said solemnly. I have loved you since the moment I pulled you out of that storm. I will love you until the moment I draw my last breath. You are my heart, my home, my everything. I love you too, Clara whispered, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. You saved my life that night, Nathaniel Cross. But more than that, you gave me a life worth living. You gave me freedom and choice and love. You gave me everything. They kissed there in the fading light, two old people who had once been young and desperate and scared, who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built the best of lives. Their children and grandchildren were back at the cabin, carrying on the party, secure in the love and stability their parents and grandparents had created. The mountains rose around them, solid and eternal, witnesses to a love story that had begun in a blizzard and had warmed countless lives since. Clara had run into a storm seeking freedom and had found it in the arms of a mountain man who had promised only to warm her up. But Nate had done so much more than that. He had warmed her heart, her soul, her entire life. He had taken a scared, desperate runaway and helped her become the strong, capable woman she had always had the potential to be. And she had done the same for him, taking a lonely mountain man and showing him that solitude was not the same as peace, that he could be loved and love in return without losing himself. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting. A family, a home, a legacy of love and strength that would carry on long after they were gone. As they walked back to the cabin, hand in hand, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. If someone had told her that winter night, as she lay freezing in the snow, that she would one day be walking these mountains as an old woman, surrounded by children and grandchildren and a love that had stood the test of time, she would have thought them crazy. But here she was, living a life she could not have imagined in her wildest dreams, and it had all started with 5 simple words from a mountain man who had meant only to keep her alive. You belong in my bed. He had meant it only as a way to warm her up, a practical solution to a dangerous problem. But those words had proven prophetic in ways neither of them could have foreseen, because she had belonged in his bed, in his life, in his heart, and he had belonged in hers. They had belonged together, two people from different worlds who had found common ground in the wilderness and built a love that had endured everything life threw at them. As they reached the cabin, surrounded by the sounds of their family celebrating, Nate pulled Clara close one more time. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For running into that storm, for trusting me, for choosing to stay, for loving me, for giving me everything I did not know I needed." Clara smiled up at him, this man who had been her salvation and her partner and her great love. "Thank you for finding me, for saving me, for seeing me as more than property or possession, for giving me the freedom to choose, and then being what I chose." They stood together in the doorway, watching their family, and Clara felt a completeness that went beyond words. This was what she had been searching for that desperate night, even if she had not known it, not just freedom from Marcus Dalton, but freedom to be herself, to love and be loved, to build a life on her own terms. And she had found it all in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected person. A mountain man who had pulled her from the snow and told her she belonged in his bed, only meaning to warm her up. But he had warmed her in every way that mattered, and in doing so had given her the greatest gift of all, a life worth living, a love worth having, and a home worth fighting for. And as the years continued and eventually came to their natural close, Clara and Nate faced their final days with the same courage and love they had shown throughout their lives together. They died within days of each other, unwilling to spend more time apart than necessary, and were buried side by side on the mountain they had called home. Their children and grandchildren carried on their legacy, passing down the stories of the runaway and the mountain man who had found each other in a blizzard and built a love that had lasted a lifetime. The cabin stood as a testament to what they had created, expanding to house multiple generations, always full of love and laughter and life. And sometimes, on winter nights when the snow fell heavy and the wind howled through the mountains, people said you could still see them. Two figures walking hand in hand through the storm, the mountain man and his brave runaway, together for eternity. Because some loves are strong enough to transcend death, to echo through generations, to become the stuff of legend. And the love between Nathaniel Cross and Clara Whitfield Cross was exactly that kind of love. The kind that changed lives, that built legacies, that proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances. All because a woman ran into a storm and a man pulled her out, telling her she belonged in his bed, only meaning to warm her up. Neither of them could have known that those words would start a love story for the ages, a tale that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. But that is the way of love, unexpected and transformative, finding you when you least expect it and changing everything you thought you knew about yourself in the world. Clara had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible, nearly dying to escape one fate, only to find a better one waiting in the arms of a stranger. And Nate had learned it too, opening his home and his heart to a desperate woman and discovering that the solitude he had thought he wanted was nothing compared to the richness of sharing his life with someone who truly understood him. Together, they had proven that love, real love, was not about contracts or society's expectations or doing what you were told. It was about choice and respect and partnership. It was about seeing someone for who they truly were and loving that person without reservation. It was about warmth in the coldest of times, shelter in the fiercest storms, and the knowledge that wherever you were, as long as you were together, you were home. And that was the legacy Clara and Nate left behind. Not just children and grandchildren, not just a homestead carved out of the wilderness, but a template for how to love completely and without fear. Their descendants carried that lesson forward, building their own lives and loves on the foundation that Clara and Nate had laid. The runaway and the mountain man had found each other in the worst of circumstances and had created the best of lives. And their love story, beginning with a blizzard and a desperate flight to freedom, ending with a life well lived and a family well loved, stood as proof that sometimes the greatest adventures come from the most desperate gambles. Clara had gambled everything on freedom, running into a storm with no plan and no hope beyond escape, and she had won everything worth having. Love, family, a life lived on her own terms, and a partner who valued her for exactly who she was. And Nate, who had thought he wanted nothing more than solitude, had gained everything he did not know he needed. Love, family, purpose, and a partner who filled his life with light and laughter. Together, they had been more than the sum of their parts, two people who had saved each other and then built something beautiful from the wreckage of their separate pasts. And their story, told and retold through the generations, remained a reminder that love could bloom anywhere, even in a blizzard, even between a desperate runaway and a solitary mountain man. All because she belonged in his bed, and he had only meant to warm her up. But warmth, as they both learned, came in many forms, and the warmth they had given each other had lasted a lifetime and beyond, a fire that never went out, a love that never faded, a partnership that showed everyone who knew them what true love really looked like. And so their story ended as all good love stories should, with two souls bound together for eternity, their love a beacon for others, their life a testament to the power of choice and courage and the willingness to risk everything for freedom and love. The mountain stood eternal, the cabin remained, and the legend lived on. Of the runaway and the mountain man who had found each other in a blizzard and had proved that sometimes the coldest nights lead to the warmest hearts and the most desperate flights lead to the safest landings. In the end, Clara had been right to run into that storm, and Nate had been right to tell her she belonged in his bed. Because she did belong there, and he belonged with her, and together they belonged to each other in a way that transcended time and place and circumstance. Their love story was complete, perfect in its imperfections, beautiful in its simplicity, enduring in its truth. And it all started with a desperate run to freedom, a terrible storm, and a mountain man who saved a shivering runaway by bringing her into his bed, only meaning to warm her up. He had warmed her, body and soul, and she had warmed him right back. And together, they had created a warmth that had lasted generations, a love that had changed countless lives, and a story that would never be forgotten. This was their happily ever after, hard-won and well-deserved, and it was everything either of them could have hoped for and more.